They told you that goodness is fire, that it burns through everything you've built, that kindness makes you pray, that generosity creates addicts, that the world is full of wolves and your only choice is to stop being a sheep. And they packaged all of that as hidden truth, as the thing nobody tells you. Here's what they actually didn't tell you. The moment you start treating your goodness as a weapon, you no longer have goodness. You have a weapon, and weapons don't love anyone back. Here's what strategic goodness actually produces at scale. Not powerful people, not respected leaders, not survivors who thrive. It produces people who have so thoroughly calculated their kindness that they no longer locate the real thing inside themselves. People who help only when it serves them, who give only when the math works out, who smile at precisely the right moment for precisely the right audience, and then wonder years later why nothing they built feels like it belongs to them. Here's what no one in the strategic goodness space will say out loud. The problem they're describing, being taken advantage of, being the person everyone calls but no one shows up for, giving until you're empty, that is a real problem. It is genuinely painful and genuinely worth solving. But the solution is not to turn your kindness into a calculation. The solution is boundaries, and boundaries have nothing to do with strategy. They have everything to do with self-respect. Those are not the same school of thought. They told you goodness makes you predictable, that being consistently kind signals to the world that you can be taken advantage of, that you need to show teeth to be taken seriously. And here is where the philosophy sounds like hard truth right up until you examine what it actually produces. Because the people who strategically withheld their warmth to avoid being predictable didn't become intriguing, they became cold. And cold people don't build anything worth having. They build networks, not relationships, not trust. Networks. And networks dissolve the moment you stop being useful. They told you that generosity creates dependency, that your repeated kindness breeds entitlement, that benefits should be conferred gradually for maximum strategic effect. And they cited hedonic adaptation, the psychological truth that people get used to good things. All technically accurate, all completely missing the point. Because the question was never whether people adapt to kindness. The question is what kind of person you become when you start rationing yours. The answer is someone who is always watching, always calculating, always deciding whether this moment of warmth is worth deploying. That is not a powerful person. That is an exhausting one. They told you that the appearance of virtue is more powerful than virtue itself, that the mask of goodness strategically worn is more effective than the real thing genuinely lived. And this is the moment where the philosophy stops being a self-improvement framework and reveals what it actually is. It is a case for performing humanity rather than inhabiting it. And the man who has spent years perfecting the performance, who smiles at the right moment and shows steel at the calculated one, and deploys mercy only when it serves him, that man has not become powerful, he has become hollow. And hollow things echo, they do not resonate. They told you that your time and energy and resources are finite, that unlimited kindness drains your strength, that you must guard your resources carefully to remain sustainable. And this is the one place in the entire philosophy where something genuinely true lives. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. Depletion is real. Resentment from chronic overgiving is real. But here is what they did with that truth. They took it and handed you a spreadsheet instead of a spine. They taught you to calculate your giving instead of to know your own limits. And a person who knows their limits gives freely within them. A person with a spreadsheet gives strategically outside of everyone's trust.
If this is landing somewhere real for you, subscribe. Content that challenges the strategic goodness gospel instead of repackaging it with a different color scheme gets buried by algorithms that reward the version of this story where you win by becoming colder and smarter and more selective with your warmth. Your subscription is an argument for the other version. Here is what the entire framework gets catastrophically wrong at its foundation. It diagnoses the right disease and prescribes the wrong medicine. Yes, chronic people-pleasing destroys you. Yes, giving without boundaries drains you. Yes, saying yes to everything means saying no to yourself. All true, completely true. But the medicine for people-pleasing is not strategic people management. It is the development of a genuine self strong enough to disappoint people without collapsing. And that self cannot be built through calculation. It is built through the slow, uncomfortable, deeply human work of knowing what you actually value and living accordingly regardless of who approves. That is not a Machiavellian principle. That is the thing Machiavelli spent his entire career avoiding. The gratitude lesson deserves its own dismantling because it is the most cynical of the 8 and the one that does the most lasting damage to the people who internalize it. They told you gratitude is temporary, that repeated favors stop feeling like gifts, that people remember the one time you said no more than the 9 times you said yes. All psychologically accurate, but watch what happens to a person who fully accepts this as their operating framework. They stop giving freely because they know it will be taken for granted. They start giving strategically because scarcity creates value. And in doing so, they lose the only thing that made their giving worth anything in the first place, the fact that it was genuine. Calculated generosity is not generosity. It is a transaction wearing generosity's face. And people feel the difference, even when they cannot name it. Here's what the Mask of Virtue lesson actually teaches, beneath the language about timing and strategic presentation. It teaches you to be 2 different people, the one the room sees and the one making the decisions behind that presentation. And they frame this as sophistication, as emotional intelligence, as knowing your audience. But a person who has lived long enough inside that split, who has maintained the public face and the private calculus long enough, eventually loses the ability to locate the line between them. They don't know anymore whether they're being genuine or performing. They can't tell if this moment of warmth is real or deployed. And that confusion is not a minor side effect of the strategy. It is the strategy consuming the person who adopted it. The outcome obsession lesson told you that the world judges results, not intentions, that history remembers people who got things done, not people who meant well, that you should stop asking, will they like me, and start asking, will this make things better? And there is something genuinely important buried in there about moving from performance to impact. But watch how they use it. They use it to justify whatever the outcome requires, to make your ethics flexible precisely when they need to be rigid, to turn the legitimate insight that good intentions aren't enough into the deeply illegitimate conclusion that intentions therefore don't matter. They do, not because history records them, because you live with them, because the person you become through your choices is the actual outcome no framework ever measures. Here's the historical context they omit every single time this philosophy gets packaged and sold. Machiavelli wrote about power from a position of total powerlessness, exiled, humiliated, desperate to prove his usefulness to the family that had destroyed his career. The Prince was not a testament to a successful life. It was an audition written by a man who had lost everything he spent his life building. And the men he described as models of strategic virtue, Cesare Borgia chief among them, ended their lives in exile, defeat, and obscurity. The manual for surviving in a world of wolves was written by a man the wolves had already finished with. That is not a detail, that is the entire story. Here's what the strategic use of virtue lesson costs you that never appears in the calculation. When you start helping only the right people a lot instead of everyone a little, when you become selective of your kindness for maximum effect, you develop a habit of assessment that does not stay contained to strategy. It bleeds into everything. You start assessing your friendships for ROI, your relationships for alignment with goals, your family interactions for whether they deplete or replenish your resources. And the people around you, even the ones who pass your strategic assessment, feel that they are being evaluated rather than loved. And no one stays long in a place where they feel like an audition.
Here's the deepest damage the strategic goodness framework does. It operates entirely below the level where people can see it happening. It changes what you notice. A person who has fully adopted this philosophy walks into a room and immediately begins reading it for leverage, for threat, for utility. They're looking for wolves. And here is the psychological truth about looking for wolves. You find them. Not because the room is full of wolves, but because the human mind finds what it is trained to look for. And a person who has spent years scanning every interaction for exploitation and strategic opportunity has built a perceptual system that generates exactly the predatory world the philosophy warned them about. They created the wolves, with their own suspicion. Psychologists call this a self-confirming attribution style, the tendency to interpret ambiguous social information in ways that confirm your existing model of how people behave. The strategic goodness practitioner interprets every act of genuine warmth as either naivety or manipulation, every request for help as a potential drain on resources, every relationship as a network to be managed. And in doing so, they systematically eliminate from their life every piece of evidence that their framework is wrong. They become unfalsifiable. And an unfalsifiable belief system is not wisdom. It is a closed room with no windows and a very convincing story about why windows are dangerous. Here's what they got right and what they got catastrophically wrong in the same breath. You should not be a sheep in a world that contains wolves. Absolutely true. Chronic people-pleasing is self-destruction with a generous face. True. Saying yes to everything means saying no to yourself. True. But the answer to all of that is not to become a strategist. It is to become a person, a full, boundaried, self-respecting person who is kind because they choose to be, not because they cannot say no, who helps because it genuinely matters to them, not because the calculation worked out, who gives freely within their actual capacity and stops without guilt when they reach it. That person does not need a strategy. They need a self. And the strategic goodness framework, in all its sophisticated packaging, is a substitute for that self dressed up as an upgrade to it. The legacy lesson told you that history doesn't honor the merely good, that you can't name 5 nice people from history, but you can name 5 people who created lasting change. And this is where the philosophy makes its most revealing mistake. It confuses being nice with being good, as though they are the same thing, and then argues against both. Nice is performance. Nice is the avoidance of conflict. Nice is the smile that costs nothing because it means nothing. But good, genuinely, substantively, courageously good, that is not weakness. That is the hardest thing a person can sustain in a world that continuously offers you reasons to stop. The people who created lasting change were not strategically good. They were deeply, inconveniently, often painfully committed to something beyond themselves. That commitment is not a strategy, it is a character. And character is not built through calculation. It is built through repeated choices made when the calculation said to choose otherwise. So if you have been studying this framework, if you have been rationing your warmth and calculating your generosity and wearing the mask and assessing your relationships for strategic value, if you have been treating goodness as a tool to be deployed rather than a quality to be lived, know this: the cost does not arrive as a single event you can point to and learn from. It arrives as a gradual disappearance of the people who would have loved you without the strategy, of the moments of genuine connection you were too busy calculating to inhabit, of the version of yourself that existed before you decided that being real was a liability. That version was not your weakness. It was the only thing in your entire life that was ever fully yours. The philosophy told you that goodness without strategy is the most dangerous trap you can fall into. Here is the truth they buried underneath that warning. Strategy without goodness is a longer trap with better lighting. It takes more years to spring, it costs more to escape, and it is far more difficult to name while you are inside it, because it always has a reason, always a justification, always a framework that explains why this calculation was necessary, and that warmth was naive, and this boundary was strategic, and that distance was wisdom. The most dangerous thing about strategic goodness is not that it fails. It is that it succeeds just enough to keep you inside it, while it takes everything that made your success worth having. Your genuine kindness is not your weakness. It never was. It was the thing they needed you to doubt, so you would buy the alternative. Don't.